Adobe Premiere Pro CC allows you to apply nuanced color adjustments to specific pixels based on their hue, saturation, and luminance values. This is usually referred to as secondary color correction, and I'd like to show you how it works. To follow along, copy the assets that accompany this tutorial to your Creative Cloud account. So here I am in the color workspace. I have the Lumetri color panel open and my Lumetri scopes are displayed. And I'm in this HSL, the Hue, Saturation, and Luminance secondary section of the Lumetri color panel. I'm going to pick out the pixels just on this jacket and see if I can change the color. If I want to, I can use these eyedroppers. I can pick out a specific color, add colors to it, and remove colors to get exactly the range I want. But I want to go over these slider controls, and I'm going to start instead with this magenta color picker. This automatically applies a selection for me, and I want to draw your attention to the little triangle at the top and the little triangle at the bottom of this control. It's also worth noting these little checkboxes to the sides that allow me to see whether I'm making a good selection or not. The top triangle is the specific range of hues that you want. And if I click and drag this, you can see the selection being adjusted. The bottom triangle is a feathering for the selection. So if I click and drag this out, you can see I'm beginning to get more and more of the other pixels. But this gives me a softening to the selection that can sometimes be very helpful. You'll notice as I make adjustments, I'm getting a display that gives me gray for the deselected pixels and color for the pixels that are inside my range. I can also click and drag this color range around. This is very useful if you want to go over the edges of the control. I think round about there is fine. And next up, I can begin to pick out saturation ranges and luma ranges. I'm going to click and drag here to pull in the saturation. And this is great because you can see now I'm losing those parts of the image which are this, I suppose that's a t-shirt underneath the jacket. Notice as I click the triangle, both sides of the center point of the selection move at the same time. See, I'm narrowing the selection too much and pulling it out there. That's a little better. Then again, I've got the control here for the luma. So let's pull this in. Doesn't seem to be making too much difference, but I think we probably want to pull in a little bit. And now to give a more natural finish, I'm going to smooth out that selection a little for the saturation and smooth out the luma. Now you might want to play with this a little bit to get more nuanced results, but I'm pretty happy with that so far. You'll notice I've got a menu at the bottom here to specify what kind of preview I'm going to get for the mask that's being generated by these controls. And a mask really just sets out an area of the image that you're working with. If I turn this on right now, you can see whether or not I'm adjusting the controls, I'm getting the mask displayed. And personally, I find very often, rather than using color and gray or color and black, I prefer the white on black display because it gives me a clearer indication. It's almost like a difference mask, if you're familiar with such a thing, that allows me to really home in on the pixels that I need. I'm pretty sure we can get away with a little bit of overlap here, but you can see as I make adjustments to these controls, and this is very much an art and a craft, I'm getting a clean area of white in the pixels that are selected and black where they're not selected. I'm just going to turn this option off. I should mention one little tiny additional button, which is right over here next to the menu. If I turn on the mask display again, I can toggle to invert the mask. And I suppose that's pretty useful if you're working with some subtle grayscales in your media. Just down under this menu, you'll notice I've got a denoise and a blur control. I'm just going to turn that mask display back on and see if I can show you what this does. Now, you'll notice the denoiser begins to remove little pixels in the media that don't fit the range, but you'd probably like them to. And that could just be because you've got noisy footage. Next up, I've got a blur, and you'll often find this has a more dramatic effect to give you a natural result. If I turn this right the way up, you can see, well, that's not much use at all with this media. But if I pull this in and just have a little bit of blurring, just so it looks a tiny bit out of focus, you'll find that the media will tend to blend better into its surroundings. So I'm just going to turn this option off again. And of course, at this point, all we've done is make a selection. I haven't made any changes to the media, and now I'm going to. I'm going to scroll down here and take a look at the controls. I've got a color wheel here, so in fact, if I click and drag out, you'll notice these controls move slowly to give you extra control. If you hold down the Shift key, these controls will move faster. You can also adjust the temperature and adjust the tint. This is really just green and magenta control. We can adjust the contrast, sharpen the image, and so on and so on. You'll notice that in addition to the color wheel, we've got an overall luminance control here as well. We also have the option to switch to 3 color wheels. So now we've got midtones, shadows, and highlights. I don't know if it's going to make too much difference if I pull down the shadows here towards the blue, because this media is mostly in the midtones. That's the pixels that we've picked out. Now remember, the Lumetri color panel creates a regular effect that you can work with in the Effect Controls panel. If I go to the Effect Controls panel now, here's my Lumetri color effect. I'm going to copy that with Control-C, that'll be Command-C on macOS. And if I just click back a little, you can see we've got another frame here with the same color range in the shot. The clip's already selected because our sequence settings are set to select the clips that are under our playhead. So if I press Control-V on Windows or Command-V on macOS, I can paste these settings directly onto another clip. So that's working with HSL secondary color correction in Adobe Premiere Pro CC.